you could presuppose that there was some initial starting point, that there was some initial necessary entity in which all contingent things come from.
And you're going to have to, if you're going to say, so if you're going to say that, why can't other things exist like God exists, then you need God to exist to have that even argument. But if you take
Why?
away that God
Why is
exists,
that? I don't understand that right there. Why do you need that God, a personal being to
so
exist?
so if you pull God out and you try to find out how other things exist, you're still got to track back to something. You've got to find a reason for it to exist.
Let's say we don't know what the initial starting point is. That doesn't, what difference does that make? It doesn't deny that contingent things exist. We just don't know the starting point. It's like you're saying you have a line of dominoes and they all tipped over. And you say, I don't know how I don't know if the wind knocked over the first domino or some person knocked it over, or maybe a rat got into the room and just actually bumped into it and knocked over the first domino, which caused the chain reaction, which made all the other dominoes fall. Just because we don't know how the first domino fell, that doesn't mean we can't know how all their other dominoes fell.
But knowing how that first domino fell is one of the most important things we can figure out, which is why people have dedicated their lives to figuring out how that first domino fell. Because depending on how that first domino fell is going to affect the rest of the dominoes. And so in our instance, if we have a personable, holy God that exhibits all the attributes of the God of the Bible, and he is the one from which all the other dominoes fall, then we immediately have a big problem, which is man and his sin that has fallen and sinned against this God, rebelled against him. And so now I need to track back and I need to figure out, what can I do to deal with the fact that this original domino, this God, this creator has expectations of me that I have not met.
Okay, you loaded a whole bunch of more assumptions onto that. Again, let's say we have no idea how that first domino fell. Again, it could have been the wind, could have been a person, could have been a mouse, maybe a truck drove by and hit a pothole and that shook the ground a little, which caused the first domino to fall over. All right. Why do we need to know what was the initial cause of the first domino to come over to know about domino 200? I think we can know things about the 200th domino
I think we're
falling over. Why do
drastically
we actually have to have a origin story of the first domino?
I think you're drastically minimizing the importance of knowing what happened with the first domino. And I don't think there's any field in which that kind of an argument would hold up. Let's say I tell my commanding officer, and I'm in the military, that, it turns out we got some nukes headed for Russia right now, man. No big deal. And he's going to say, how'd that happen? He's going to want to go back to find out, how did this button get pushed? How did these nuclear bombs get headed that way? It's going to be very important to him to find out exactly how this happened. Because if we're at war, that's one thing. If it was an accident, that was another thing. It has drastic effects on humanity, how and why that button got pushed. And I think what we've done is we've minimized man's sinfulness and man's problem. And the Bible's clear that an atheist is suppressing the truth of a holy God in his mind to avoid his own sin problem. So the fact that you don't want to deal with the first domino falling down, the only reason for that is because if we back it up, you're going to meet a holy God that's got a problem with your sin problem. And so that knowing that first domino is one of the most important things we can know. That's the only domino that actually matters. After that, it's just, it really doesn't matter. Knowing what happened to that first domino is the only important thing we can know.
Again, I don't see why that's necessary at all. I think you have it completely backwards. I think we have to know things about our current state of being, our current environment, to be able to survive, thrive, and so forth. It's definitely interesting. It would be, I think we definitely would like to know what it is, but it could have just come from the Big Bang or some quantum foam, or we could just be in a cyclical expanse and contraction and so forth. All those things are very interesting, and we're definitely curious, but yeah, I think you're giving it too much importance. Now, I think you're loading in that this God has expectations, or this starting point has expectations for wants us to follow him and so forth. So again, I don't see that's necessary. But again, back to abstract objects.
Well,
Again,
I'm curious why you don't think that is necessary. I think pretty much everything you do in life, except for this one area, you do take the time to figure that out. For instance, if you're going to buy a used car and it's got 100,000 miles on it, Are you going to want to know the service records of the vehicle? Are you curious how many owners the vehicle has? Like, why do things like Carfax even exist if it's not important for us to know the origins? I think you're going to be really interested in that all of a sudden. Or you're in IT, let's say you're coding something along in Python and you're getting a syntax error. You're going to need to go back up to find out what caused that syntax error. I think every other field of life, you are going to be concerned with what pushed the original domino. And I don't know why you're making an exception for the cause of the universe, because that seems like an even more important place to care about the first domino.
Again, for me to let's take your car analogy. For me to drive a car, I don't need to know what plant it came out of. I don't need to know who the designer or the model is. I don't need to know who is the founder of the company. I don't need to know the history of the car. I don't need to know about Henry Ford and the Model T and so forth. I don't even have to know about spark plugs or how a combustion engine works to be able to drive it and so forth. I don't need to know any of that stuff.
I think you have to know all that stuff. How do you know how to get the car to turn on if you don't know what make and model is, where the start button is, and how to turn it on? You're assuming that you know a whole lot more about this car than you actually need to know. I think you are going to need to know a lot more about that car to be able to drive that car.
Well, all I need to know is
Gas.
like turn the key, or
How'd you
nowadays you only need to do that. Just press a button with.
But how did you figure that out? You had to know that from somewhere. That knowledge didn't just come to you in osmosis.
Well, someone taught me the dealership. It's okay. Yeah, you hold this fob. You have to have this fob on you, and you press that button. That's all you need to know.
But you do need to know that. You actually do need to know that. And if you go to NASA and decide to test drive one of their space cars or whatever, that's going to be a whole different learning cycle. And before they're going to let you drive it, they're going to have to teach you how to use it. And you're going to need to know things about it, like the make and the model and how it operates. I think it is going to be very important for you to know those things. I think you're assuming that you know a lot more than you do when you come to driving a car. I can't take a 2-year-old and expect them to drive a car down the road because they haven't been taught to drive a car yet. There's a lot of things they do need to know. Now, do they need to know every specific inner working at all the time? Absolutely not. But all of a sudden, you're going to need to know where the gas goes when you run out of fuel. You're going to need to know that a combustion engine requires gas if you're driving a gas-fueled car. You're going to have to know a lot more than you think you know.
You can know that you need gas, but you only have to know the term combustion engine.
No, that's true. But you need to know that your car runs on gas. There's a level of detail that you don't have to know, but there are big concepts that you certainly have to know. And for instance, we could go back to the same argument and take it with the idea of trying to fuel your car. Where does gas come from? You don't need to know all the particulars of where gas comes from, but you certainly got to know that you're going to get it at a gas station. You're going to have to back these things up and find out where they are.
Yeah, but again, you don't need to know about gas. You don't need to know the difference between diesel and gasoline. You don't have to know that 50 years ago or 60 years ago, it was just leaded gas. And then now it runs on unleaded. You don't need to know the history of that at all. You just need to know that you go to the gas station, you get unleaded gas. And for my make, if I want to be thrifty with my money, I'm just going to go for the regular. I don't need a premium.
So you've just explained a whole lot of things that you had to know.
I don't know how premium is produced differently than unleaded,
just explain
regular.
You got to know which pump to grab. Is it diesel or gas? You got to know that where the nozzle is going to go in your car. You're going to need to know if you have enough money to pay for the gas. You're assuming a lot of implied knowledge that I think shouldn't be overlooked. And when it comes to the universe and we look back at finding out where things come from, I think figuring out the first thing and knowing that is very important. All the intricate details of how God has orchestrated things and makes it happen that the atheist would explain away by saying it's all naturalism, all those cool scientific details. There's a reason science studies those things. And we know about how cells and plants work and how the sun fuels the things that makes the plants grow, and they need water and they need air and there's carbon. There is a reason we need to know all that stuff. And that all takes us back to somewhere.
Again, you don't need to know all the detail. We don't need to go back real far. The more you know, the better, right? The more you know, the more informed decisions that you can make, the more intelligent decisions you can make and so forth. But for a lot of everyday things, you don't need to have a PhD.
Let's assume you know nothing about the car in your driveway. Let's assume you don't know the make, model. You don't know where it came from. You don't know nothing. You just know that it won't go. And so you call your tech support guy. First question he's going to ask you, what kind of car do you have? I don't think you have to know all the extra pieces, but you do have to know the big things. And where we come from and how we got here is a very big thing to know. And like you said, there's a difference between how the engine's going to work in a Ford or a Honda or a Tesla. Those are going to be different things. And the auto parts guy is going to need to know those answers to those questions to help you figure out how to work it. Now, you don't have to know all the details. There can be a conglomeration of people that know different sides of details to answer your problem. But I think figuring out where we come from in the universe is a much bigger deal than you're acting like it is.
Again, we could come from some quantum foam, some sort of quantum flux. The universe could exist eternally and so forth.
But those would all have different implications on how we live. Because if I come from any of the options you just described, then there is zero problem with me just fulfilling the evolutionary model and killing my next door neighbor's kid because I want to get her inheritance money. Whereas in the Christian worldview, we say this has huge implications on your eternal destiny and what happened and what you're created for and what will satisfy you in life. I think the difference between the Christian and the atheist, figuring out where we come from, has gigantic implications on how you're going to live your life and how you're going to spend your eternity.